given the amount of expertise on this panel, we could go on for 5 hours. And since we don't have 5 hours, I was given the onerous responsibility of trying to ask some meaningful questions so that we can get some of this wisdom into an hour, which is something of a challenge. I'll start with Mr. N.K. Singh, who I've known for many years. N.K., so if you were to be looking at it from the point of view of a sort of big picture on Bihar, what would you be thinking in terms of big priorities for the state and big? And let's start with the bad news. What do you think are the big places where the state will get stuck? I want you to start by thinking about this Bihar is doing well. What are the constraints? If you had to pick some constraints, things that Bihar should do to anticipate those constraints and move things so that things don't hit those constraints, what would those constraints be? And how would you envisage Bihar anticipating constraints, this period of extremely high growth? Where could it get stuck? What are the issues?
Well, thanks, Abhijit. I think it's a very broad, sweeping question which you want me to address. But let me, in 1 minute, say that if you look at the disaggregated intersectoral growth figures published by the CSSO, which places growth rates in Bihar on an average of 11.03 for the last 5 years, what really very pleasantly surprised me is that the growth has been fairly widespread. Agriculture has grown by an average about 7%, which is 3% higher than what India wants to grow at. Industry and manufacture as a category has grown by 22%. The services sector, which was said to be the driver in the growth, actually has grown by only 12%. And within the industry, manufacture sector, construction sector has grown by 40%. The entertainment, hotel, tourism, that sort of stuff has grown by 18%. And so I think that it looks to be a growth which is reasonably high, spread over all sectors, and it's not as if one sector particularly has driven this growth. And I've written a piece which will be published on the editorial page of Hindustan Times for Monday, where I have tried to very briefly analyze some of the factors which could have led to it. I'll just mention two, because you have asked me the more difficult question on what I see to be the constraints. But the two big things, as I could see, is obviously there has been no large burst of big ticket item for private investment. I mean, one hasn't seen really very big private investment come in spite of all the efforts which the state government has put in and so on. So I think the one big driver, as I can see, and I think you can question me on that, is I think the vastly improved security environment which instills a sense of optimism in people of the future, has led to large postponed micro-atomistic decisions, which when aggregated together brings about a quantum change which cannot be captured by cold statistics. So it is the individual microcosm decision, the decision to go in for a durable, the decision to build a house, the decision to undertake a transaction, that has got greatly triggered by a feeling of confidence about the future, built greatly on security of life and property. So I never realized that till I saw at Bihar's figure what a huge difference the outlook for the future makes on human psychology, and how much of individual decisions are really driven by an improved psychology of the future. The second, of course, which is the more obvious factor, is that the dramatically larger planned outlay, much more than the state has ever seen. I mean, if 1,200 crores was roughly what was the planned outlay in 2001-2, and you climb up from there to a figure which is 16,000 crores, I mean, it's a kind of a quantum change. So, of course, somebody asked me that, is this a steroid overdose of a large state-led stimulus which cannot be sustained as soon as the steroids are withdrawn? And I said perhaps not, because in the meantime revenues have gone up, investment and savings have gone up, income levels have got ratcheted up. So are Bihar's problems over? Can we really declare victory? I must also say episodically that when Rameshwar Singh, who is our principal planning secretary, who is here, when the two of us were drawing up the 11th 5-year plan for Bihar, you will recall, Rameshwar, that it was our hope that towards the terminal years of the plan, Bihar's growth rate, which was on a linear trend rate of 3.5 to 4% historically, could perhaps begin to mirror the national averages. With 2 years left for the plan, we have already 3% higher than what the national average was. I was obviously very wrong in terms of underestimating the colossal change and the momentum which economic activity had really got built up. Now, constraints. I would say, first and foremost, I would say that clearly looking at the low base from where it all began, and looking at the fact that India is poised to grow at, let's say, 8% plus in the balanced part of the 11th and certainly in the 12th plan, Bihar would have to at least sustain this rate of growth for about 10 years or so to be able to make its per capita income mirror approximately what India's per capita income would be at that particular point in time. Now, the 3 or 4 very major factors on which it would be contingent on. First and foremost, political continuity. I think that there is no secret that Bihar is headed for an election before the end of this calendar year, and that it requires a degree of political stability and continuity of policy for all this to get realized. There's a lot of stuff which is in the works, and these would need to be successfully completed. In fact, Bihar would also be a very good test case on whether the matrix of development has an influence deep enough on the voter psychology, cutting across other factors which have stratified the Bihar society in terms of caste, class, and other kinds of divides, and whether development as an entity cuts across this, and Bihar would be a test case to really enable this to get proved one way or the other. The second big challenge for Bihar is that so far its success in attracting private investment has been rather disappointing, because whereas a lot of small private decisions have taken place, a lot of micro decisions have taken place, a lot of small and mediums have taken place, a lot of stuff which people where in eastern India has come, I think Bihar has yet to attract the big burst of private investment, and since sustaining public outlays to this extent would become increasingly difficult, its success in being able to attract large private burst of investment. Third, the extent to which energy deficiency can be mitigated. And I think Bihar is a very energy deficient state. And this, setting up a new power plant, which of course depends on whether the coal linkage is available or not quickly enough, and whether we are able to buy power, surplus power or not, how would we be able to address the endemic energy deficiency of Bihar? The fourth biggest challenge, I think, is that if you look at long-term agricultural productivity, notwithstanding the 7% rate of growth, overall agricultural productivity continues to be way below what its potential was. What can we do to really be able to garner not only much higher levels of agricultural productivity, but I think improve agricultural linkages, prevent wastes, improve the rural network to be able to get into the rural economy, to improve shelf life, to have cold chains, to have the whole agricultural economy on what the Chief Minister typically has described as his rainbow program, which is agriculture and allied activity, looking at a very adverse land-man ratio and the fragmentation of holdings in the state. Then I think that really speaking to improve farm incomes, he came up with this word, rainbow agriculture, which basically means improve the income of the farmers by making them take allied activities in terms of dairy, poultry, horticulture, fruits, vegetables, and the whole range of that. So the agricultural strategy, I think, is a major issue. Two more and I'll close. One is success which we are able to achieve in really securing the demographic advantage. I think a lot of initiatives have begun on education, but I think outcomes have yet to be tested. And I think we need to make sure, similarly, in terms of improvements in the primary health centers, on which a number of initiatives have been taken, whether the outcomes really, over a long period of time, are able to demonstrate the fact that there is a qualitative improvement in both education and health. This I say because, we were looking at the number of teachers which we need to recruit, looking at the number of faculty which you need to attract for higher echelons, looking at the number of doctors that you need. Bihar will soon have to become a vast training laboratory with some measure of success to be able to fill these huge gaps in Bihar's social sector.
Thank you. In a sense, I was glad of that list because a lot of those areas, agriculture, education, health, social service, delivering redistribution programs, are areas where our work clearly impinges on exactly these questions, and therefore, in a sense, it's exciting that you think those are priorities. Let me come to Michael now. In a sense, I want to ask you the same question. As a donor, you presumably think hard about, especially a donor with a lot of vision, you think the hard about what the next step should be. And so the flip side of that question is where I thought, have you thought about what would you, if you had to pick 5 things for Bihar to do, what would you pick?
Thank you. Abhijit, is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. I was reflecting on what it would be like if we gathered 40 years from now. And for some of us, that's fairly ambitious in terms of life longevity. If we gathered 40 years from now, to ask the question of what was the experience, I think we would associate ourselves very closely with some of the things which NK has said, in particular starting from a low base and sustained growth above the all-India average being the key to success over time. I think we might look back at deliberations today and say, thank goodness they started measuring what works back then. Thank goodness that they finally started more systematically measuring the difference between what interventions actually make a difference against the control groups. And 40 years from now, they'll look back and say, those poor people, what they didn't have, what we have now, 40 years later, is a database of lots of studies that show what kinds of techniques work, and most important of all, this is often underemphasized, 40 years from now, they'll know more about what doesn't work, and therefore about what kinds of interventions to not put money into. So I think they will be grateful that we started to invest now in measuring impact. I think 40 years from now, they will look back at us and they will say, why didn't they spend more time planning for climate variability and climate change? We heard the Deputy Chief Minister say that the single biggest constraint on growth is flooding. And the basic human impulse of getting control over environmental factors so that viable human development can take place is still not completed in Bihar. And the question of adapting to and working with the kind of climate variability that there is, and if that becomes climate change as well, is still an unfinished task. They might say, of course, NK Singh was absolutely right that access to energy is vital. Without energy, it's impossible to address the most important human development and growth constraints. But they may ask 40 years from now, why didn't they think more about distributed energy production? Because big coal plants will only last so long, and India total coal reserves are only going to last so long. Why didn't they invest more 40 years ago in distributed solar energy and biomass and so on, biogas? So I think, why didn't they spend a little bit more time thinking ahead? Now, there's always a trade-off between the short-term gains, to some extent, and the long-term. But I think 40 years from now, they will have thanked us if we thought more long-term now. Now, that Abhijit, is not a kind of list of the 5 things that are most important.
I noticed.
Yeah. Well, can pay for better talent next time. But I think it is important to think long term about doing what the Chief Minister said. We want to eliminate poverty in our lifetimes, and that means working quickly, effectively, dynamically now, but also the long term. And I think in DFID we are very, very excited about a long-term partnership with the government of Bihar, because we think that there are really good things happening. There's a lot of dynamism. There's a lot to get done. And I think what we've seen in Bihar is a fantastic case study of how simply changing the quality of governance can turn around overall growth and human well-being in a really short period of time. And it has to deal with that psychological dimension, the things that cannot be captured in cold statistics about psychological attitudes and all the micro decisions. So I'm going to stop at that. I might come later.
Absolutely. You will. I will certainly invite you back in a few minutes. Mr. Kumar, can I come to you? So, if you had to pick one of the things that, let's say, NK suggested, maybe agriculture or attracting industry, what would you think would be within that set of strategies that you're thinking about in the Bihar government? And what do you think are, if you had to think of, there are many kinds of strategies, the demand strategies, technology strategies, finance strategies. Are there specific initiatives that you think are very exciting along, in the broad development area, like in agriculture or in finance, that you think would be worth highlighting, and maybe we can think of evaluations, but maybe not, but even otherwise?
Yeah, I would like to talk about some initiatives that we have taken, but not necessarily in the two areas that you have mentioned. I want to go beyond that.
Please.
And many people perhaps would not be aware of this, that we are taking a lot of initiative in the field of information technology, implementing IT for development. Now, there is a national e-governance program going on, which the center and the states are implementing. And there, Bihar is one of the leaders. For example, we have already set up our the state-wide area network, going down from the state to district up to the block. We have a data center over here, which is state of the art, and we are already hosting some of the applications. For example, the application for treasury that we have already installed, and we have converted that application from a simple treasury application to a comprehensive financial management software for the government, so that today, looking at the computer screen, you can find out what is the status of state's finances. That is one. The other is, for the rural areas, the state government has encouraged and implemented the installation of what is known as the CSCs, the Common Services Centers. These are e-kiosks, and these are to be set up in the rural areas. Now, when this scheme came to us, the government of India told us that you establish one center for 6 revenue villages. And when we made a calculation, we found that we would be establishing something like 6,000 centers all over the state. And we had 8,500 panchayats. So we said, we must have a center in each panchayat rather than in 6 revenue villages, one for 6 revenue villages. So at that time, Government of India was reluctant to allow that. So we said, okay, we go ahead and we will provide for that additional thing. So we have gone ahead, and now Government of India has adopted that for the entire country now. So now there's going to be a common service center in each panchayat. Now this is one single step which I think is going to revolutionize the rural development. Why? we thought when we started with this, we thought that who is going to ask for internet connectivity in a village? Why would they want it? And we were very apprehensive, and that is why government of India provided for some revenue support in the beginning for all these centers. These centers are established by private entrepreneurs. These are not established by the government. But once they have started coming, we find that the villagers, they want to know what is the mandi bhav, that means the price of commodities, food grains. They are paying 2 rupees and finding out what is the price of the commodities. They are using that for sending communication, emails to their relatives in distant places. They are getting a lot of information regarding education and health issues. And we have requested the Reserve Bank of India now. The Reserve Bank of India has a program of 100% financial inclusion, where every rural household is supposed to be given access to banking facilities. So they are appointing business correspondents. So we have requested the Reserve Bank of India that they should consider appointing these centers, people who are running these centers as correspondents, because these people are there permanently. People know that this center is over here, it has connectivity, so banking is very easy from there. So RBI is now coming around to this idea, and this is one innovation that we have done. And I think this is going to contribute very significantly in rural development, because banking services, credit facilities, they could all come through these centers. And I find that the insurance companies, they have gone ahead and contracted these centers to sell their insurance policies. So all kinds of financial inclusion is taking place through these centers. So these are the kind of some of the innovations that we have done.
Roberto. Roberto took a plane which got him from Delhi to be here almost exactly on time. So thank you for being here. I guess from the World Bank's perspective, I know that there was maybe last 15 years, there's been a Bihar conversation that's going on in the World Bank. You hear, there's going to be we're going to discuss the Bihar problem. Do you see this as being, and then now there was I think more recently there was more optimistic conversations in the World Bank. Within the World Bank, do you see, from the point of view of the World Bank, do you see things sort of, if you had to identify the things that maybe made that conversation somewhat shift in the World Bank, what do you see as the big positives from Bihar, looking from outside?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question you didn't ask.
I will ask maybe.
You don't need to ask me early on. When you work in the World Bank and you go to many countries and states, you often ask the question, what does this particular state, government, or country need to do to accelerate growth? And 25 years ago, we thought we had a formula. The formula was, in a caricatural way, the Washington consensus, we start with the world, reduce tariffs, fiscal, less government, more private sector, so on and so forth. Deregulate, privatize, liberalize. And then we realized, with the benefit of hindsight, that things weren't that simple and didn't work quite that way. And so we were confronted at the beginning of the 2000s with the puzzle that countries that had seemingly applied the same reforms, liberalized, privatized, and deregulated, had very different results. You had, on the one hand, East Asia, which forged ahead, India, which 1991 started reforms which propelled it to where it is today. China was nothing less than a miracle, East Asia, of course, and so on and so forth. So these policies were kind of yielded results. Seemingly the same policies in Africa, in Latin America, in Central Europe during the end of communism and the movement to market economies, created nothing less than economic collapse, social collapse, and years of... so the answer, it was clear that the answer was not privatize, deregulate, liberalize. I mean, there was much more to it than that. And the bank undertook essentially a 6 years program of studies to try to answer this question. And the last part of this exercise was a commission on growth and development, which combined practitioners and theoreticians. It had a very high level of representation of policymakers with experience in policymaking. From India, Monte Carlo Valley was a member. There were other very, as distinguished people from other countries who met for a period of 2 years with a number of academics, reviewed the existing literature. Abhijit was part of this exercise in a couple of workshops and papers. And at the end of this combination of very advanced intellectual thinking and practice from reality coming from the day, blood, sweat and tears of implementing policies and living with the results, came something which you'll be pleased to know, MK, come remarkably close to what you were saying at the beginning. And in a stylized way, the way that emerged from the exercise is that when there is no recipe. The way the exercise was conducted, we asked ourselves which are the economies which were able to grow at very high rates for long periods of time. Long periods of time is critical because it's very easy for economies to grow very rapidly for 2 or 3 years, 4 years, but what makes really the difference between moving away from underdevelopment to achieve industrial country levels of income is sustaining rapid economic growth for 3, 4, 5 decades. Just look at Japan, look at China, and so on and so forth. And so the question was, what are the characteristics of these economies which have been able to grow at more than 7%? That was a benchmark. There's nothing sacred to 7% except that income doubles every 10 years, so that's an easy number to remember. And 25 years is roughly a generation. And there are remarkably few, only 13 countries. India was not part of the 13 countries, so it almost made it. And perhaps if we redo the exercise today, it would make it. And then the question was, what are the characteristics of this high-speed, long growth over long periods of time? And the 5 characteristics that emerged, and there were 5, Abhijit, if you read the growth report, that's where the 5 comes from, were, first of all, leadership. And the leadership committed to economic growth, committed to the things that leadership needs to do to create a vision, mobilize political forces around that objective, make the hard choices between today and tomorrow that need to be made to propel growth, to create a sense of security and optimism that you referred to. The second was effective government, effective in its ability to deliver all the services that are necessary for the economy to grow and develop, from education, and which is sine qua non to development, to infrastructure, energy, understanding the process of development, understanding what are the binding constraints, what are the policy measures that are needed. And the third one was markets. Government cannot do it all. It's important to be able to attract entrepreneurship, ensure that markets function. The recent financial crisis, September 2008, remind us, markets don't always work the way we expect them to work. So there's a need to supporting infrastructure. So it's a long topic, we cannot go into it. And the fourth characteristic was leveraging the global economy. It's much easier to learn than to invent. There is a large amount of technologies out there in the world about how to produce things, how to deliver services. So integrating this technology through learning, importation of foreign direct investment, education abroad, the many ways in which an economy, whether it's a country or whether it is a state, can absorb what's known in terms of technology abroad is very important. And the fourth is, again, what NK was referring in almost the same words, which is an orientation towards the future, an intent in improving living conditions in the future, which entails decisions on investment, decisions on savings, decisions on taxation. So this is the five broad characterization, and within that, what a specific country and a specific state needs to do, well, there's no recipe, and it is a hard work to decide which are the priorities. But certainly, when we are asked what that the bank can do to help a certain economy to grow and develop for long periods of time and rapidly, we I think I at least, and several that went through, have been persuaded by this exercise, try to think through that framework. And when it comes to Bihar, for many years we looked at Bihar like a bit with discouragement, but there was a radical change, which is suddenly there was a leadership committed to economic growth and development in an inclusive way. And I think that makes a lot of difference. And that's, of course, the beginning of the journey, certainly not the end. There are many other things that need to fall in place. When it is like Mike was referring to on understanding what works, so whether it is energy or agriculture, as NK was referring to, whether it's IT, as the Honorable Commissioner was referring to. I mean, I don't have a clear view, but it's certainly all of these are important and should be part of the equation. So it's, in a sense, there was a sense of surprise when the numbers came out. I don't think that anyone expected that it would come above India average, about 10%. A sense of delight because it proves that what we know intuitively, that economies which are at a low level of development can grow very fast because there's a lot of catch-up to do. So it's not, on paper it's not rocket science. In practice, it really takes enormous talent and savoir-faire and political insight and lucidity and perhaps 10 other qualities. And so we haven't changed our mind in Bihar in the sense that the job just confirms that this is possible, but there's a huge agenda ahead. And we were very gratified to receive from the government of Bihar a request for very large investment of in a variety of areas, but mostly having to do with management and control the water problem in Bihar, which can have huge positive impacts in the future. So I cannot say that we have a clear agenda yet. I think the better agenda that I've heard so far is what we heard a few minutes ago in terms of what is important. But what's very encouraging is that there is a way forward now, and there is optimism and hope.
That optimistic note. Mr. Sharma, I guess I wanted mostly to ask the same kind of question as Mr. Kumar. I wanted to know what you're excited about. What are schemes and things you're excited about? Is that sort of, for us, if you in thinking in terms of, what's happening and understanding where are the margins of innovation? What do you think are the exciting places in among the policy initiatives? Of course, you're doing many things that are quite basic and doing them right with governance and things like that. Is there specific initiatives that you think are very important?
You see, I was in Bihar when the bifurcation took place, and in fact, I was in the same department. I was Additional Finance Commissioner in those days, and I remember the discussion which used to take place in those days that Bihar is doomed. The day the division would take place, that was 14th November 2000. Patna will go totally dark. The entire thing is going on the other side. And I also somehow, I must confess that I also had such a premonition. So, but when I came back to Bihar, and I have landed in Finance Department after doing stints in health and animal husbandry. Things are much better than what it used to be in those days. The financial position is much better. Like Mr. N.K. Singh mentioned, from a plan size of 1,200, we are now at 16,000, and we are aspiring for more than 20,000 crore of plan size. So this obviously is very, very exciting. Just to think that, Bihar can, in 10 years time, Bihar will be much past Jharkhand. This was totally unimaginable, in those days. So we have done that. And the thing is that, we think that this is just the start. We can go much beyond that. I think this optimism is the most exciting thing, I would say. In finance, like Mr. Navin Kumar mentioned, the changes which have come place, the B-SWAN and the CTMIS, just at the click of the mouse, now I know which drawing and disbursing officer has how much allotment left with him, and this kind of control was, we just didn't know in those days that how much expenditure. If you ask me the expenditure level, even in the month of May, I will not be able to tell you how much we have spent, by March. Now, if you want just now, this second, what is the expenditure level, which department, which bill has been cleared, I can tell you. So this obviously on this side, this has been a tremendous success, huge progress. I also worked in health. Things have tremendously improved. Though of course there are lots of challenges. I would like to talk very briefly about the challenges, because things are of course very exciting. I think we will grow at a very fast rate. But the challenges would be, the number of poor, which are there in this state, the number of people who are without any assets, be it land or be it skill or be it education, that lifting them to a size, to a level where they can lead a respectable life, is going to be a huge challenge. Inclusive growth, I think that would be the biggest challenge for Bihar in the next decade. But if this kind of growth, remains, the momentum remains, then obviously I think, people here have a very bright future, because intrinsically, people have confidence, because Bihar has a culture, thousand of years of culture, and Bihar was once the seat of power of the entire country. So people have people think of those times, and that sustains them, even, when I joined in the IAS, when I was in the academy, whenever the mention of Bihar would come, the people would laugh, as if this is a state which can never come up, But intrinsically, I used to feel that, this is not correct. This is just a phase of time, People here are talented, and we are certainly going to come up. So that confidence, I think, Bihari people have, and given the right kind of policy, leadership, a good governance, there is absolutely no reason why Bihar cannot turn around the corner, and Bihar is doing it. I'm very optimistic about the future, but the bringing about an inclusive growth, that will be our biggest challenge. But God willing, we'll be able to do that. Thank you.
Roberto. So you heard both the optimism and some of the concerns. If you think of framing a research agenda, IGC, maybe you should start by saying something about what IGC is. But after that, around this, what would you think are again, I've asked for 5 priorities. I've not quite got the answer to that from anybody. I got 5 from Roberto, but on something else. So I won't name a number anymore. But let me just ask, what would you think are the from a research agenda? What would be your priorities in that? What would be you bring a whole group of people, very talented people who work with you in the IGC. What do you think that for them would be interesting problems? What could deliver to Bihar?
Okay.
You had to
So just very, very briefly on what the IGC is, because not everybody's aware of that. So this is a new centre. It's more like a sort of international network. It has a hub at the London School of Economics. And it sort of actually echoes some of the characteristics that Abhijit was expounding about J-PAL. People were J-PAL and also collaborating in certain areas, including Bihar. But there's sort of three characteristics that are important. First is that we're demand-driven. So I was in Bihar first time 8 years ago, and in the last 6 months I've been here 3 times. So I've been able to see the vast differences between 8 years ago and the present time. But basically for the last 3 visits, it's all been about listening to wide varieties of people. Particularly helpful, our key interlocutor here it's been Navin Kumar, as well as a range of other secretaries and ministers. We've also been speaking very much to the private sector, to the civil society and so forth. So that's sort of one characteristic. The second characteristic, which very much echoes again the need for long-term engagement. So we have funding for 10 years, so we're going to be in Patna for 10 years. And I think that's important because it's not everything's going to happen in the next few years, so there's going to be need for long-term engagement. And the third characteristic is, that very much like J-PAL, we focus on frontier research. So we're interested in sort of how you can bring frontier research into policy. Now, coming back to the specific question that Abhijit posed, I mean, the way I see it is rather, perhaps a little bit simplistic, but if you think about a very simple political economy model, you have preferences, institutions, and policy. Much of the problems in Bihar had to do with the sort of aggregation of the institutional level into policies. And this is true whether you're talking about sort of the state level government or government at a much more local level. So what we've had in effect is a big change in state government, particularly the top level of the state government. And that's led to a range of things. One is much better policies, but also this growing optimism. But it does strike me that there is an awful long way to go when you begin to even probe into some of the areas where there has been progress made. It becomes apparent that institutional change has taken place mainly at the top. So this is still in a work in progress at the bottom. So sort of backing up, it seems to me that the big challenge is to the first sort of characteristic I would say of all the states I've been to in India, which is funny because you'd always heard that Bihar was a mess, that Bihar didn't work. This is a state that I've come to with the greatest openness. So the people have been most sort of open in terms of let's try everything. There's a real market for ideas in Bihar at the moment. And we need to kind of evaluate those ideas, but once those sort of ideas, innovations are evaluated, we know something about what they work, the challenge is actually going to be sort of making them part of the system. It's not going to be just enough to know that that one thing works here. You've got to kind of move that into the sort of systematic level. And that is still going to be a challenge because that involves people who are used to doing things in a certain way, so you're going to have to sort of scale that up to a different level. On the specifics, from what I've heard in the last sort of 6 months, I'd say there's sort of four main areas. The first is in this sort of governance and accountability sort of area, which if you listen to the chief minister, you say, what are your 3 priorities for creating growth? And he'll say, governance, governance, and governance. And it took me a little while to sort of figure out what he implied, but a lot of what he was talking about was this sort of aggregation, whether you have sort of proper means of, everybody wants their kids to go to school, everybody wants their kids to be healthy, but do you have the institutions that actually aggregate those preferences into policy? And that is still not the case very much at the local level. So there's still a lot that can be improved. So one thing I keep hearing about is local government, or to put it more bluntly, often the absence of local government, so particularly at the panchayat level. So working out how you can get functional local government. And that's an area where we've heard some interesting examples, an area where you can do proper evaluation, where you can experiment and work out what works. But there has to be sort of a sea change, and it's going to have to involve a system-wide change in the there's basically a whole tier of government that needs to be sort of created and made accountable to its citizens. So there's lots of questions about information, elections and so forth that fits into that. A second area which is absolutely critical is this area of the Deputy Chief Minister was sort of alluding to, which is the whole area of sort of rural development.
So there's this broader sort of issue, which is perhaps one of the oldest in development, which is structural change. And we tend to think of that as, industrialization, urbanization. But if you look at places like Bangladesh, which sort of fell within the same British settlement system, you basically have this much more structural changes taking place in Bangladesh. So you see all sorts of activities happening in Bangladesh villages, which you don't see in Bihar villages. So how not only can agricultural be made more productive, but how can you bring in different... I'm not talking about sort of fancy industries. I'm just talking about sort of basic service type industries, basic manufacturing into the rural areas. That's going to be a real challenge. For example, take all the fish apparently is purchased from West Bengal. It seems to be perfectly capable of producing some fish in Bihar. A third area which is important, and I think which we can get people from both the kind of industrial organization type areas and also finance, is this whole question of, okay, so we want industrialization, but how do you make that happen? And one thing which I've heard much more from the private sector side is everybody welcomes the new industrial policy, but the actual process by which you get a plant started in Bihar, so you'll very likely get approval for your plant, but then the body, the sort of single window body, then sort of kicks down. So you want to start a plant, but you want some land. So then that gets kicked into a department and goes down the department. So the single window system, though welcome, obviously relative to the sort of the past system, which is essentially not anybody starting plants, I think can be vastly improved to make it sort of to empower it in order to make it a body that actually begins to create many more plants. So what you hear is exactly what NK was saying. If you look down the roster of which plants are coming, they're smaller level plants that privately can just sort out what they need to sort out to get the plant started. But the big investors are not yet coming, and that is something which is going to be important in the future. A third, and then I'll finish on the last one. A third area is this, as yet, little studied, I'd say, question of how you run better cities in developing countries. And there's a group led by Enrico Moretti at Berkeley who's getting very interested, not just in terms of what's happened, in terms of the sizes of cities, how those have changed, whether big cities have gotten bigger or middle cities have gotten bigger, but actually how you operate cities and how you make them better places to live. And this seems to be an absolutely central issue for Bihar because of the diaspora. You've got lots of talented Biharis outside of Bihar. Many of them would like to come back to Bihar, and creating more functional cities is going to make that. There's also this sort of questions of these sort of, can you create IT clusters, industrial clusters, you create better transportation, better governance. And these are absolutely central in a place like Patna. If you really have this ambition of going well beyond kicking up agricultural productivity a bit, and you actually want to be a sort of a major city in India, then these sorts of issues are going to have to be thought about, and tough decisions are going to have to be made. And then finally, I would say that the thing that we perhaps it's a fairly nitty-gritty thing, but it's absolutely central, is I think the old term is resource mobilization. But that sort of has two bits. That has the raising of revenue, and again I've heard a lot of openness about how do we improve revenue collection and the scope for experiments in that area, which are becoming more common. So we're doing some experiments with IGC in Pakistan. We would like to do some here. So there's the revenue raising thing. But there's another side of this which we spoke about in the morning. How do you spend the money? And how do you improve the efficiency by which you spend the money? And the most striking thing about Bihar is that even for the large federal programs, because of this limited capacity at the local level, it's often difficult to spend money in Bihar. So it seems strange. They have this massive development program, one of the most ambitious development programs in India. And it's not just a revenue problem. It's not just you don't have the money. There is quite a lot of money flowing in from donors, from the federal programs. There's some money being raised in the state. And so I think that whole question, going back to my first point of local capacity, is absolutely central. And this may not always be the state. It may be, as was being discussed by Navin, the the role of the private sector, the role of NGOs. And again, going back to the openness point, I feel that there is an indication of great openness to sort of form partnerships with the private sector, with the NGOs, which can be capitalized upon. Because I was speaking to a friend of mine called E. Somanathan at ISI, and he said he'd come to Bihar to do a project, and he was on some road, and it was an absolutely terrible road. And so he said to the driver, "This is the most terrible road I've ever seen." And the guy said, "This road is a wonderful road." So he's starting at such a low base that, that we have to kind of realize that when you get down into the sort of hinterlands of Bihar, there's an awful lot to be done. And I'm not just talking about spending money, I'm talking about actually having accountable providers of services, accountable government, and the kind of infrastructure that will create a source of revenue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I think that's a good. I thought I'd come to. I think the two representatives of the Bihar government, because I think Robin raised some very interesting issues, and I felt like maybe you could tell us. You can decide who is going to. I mean, I don't really have any reason to direct it. So, questions on both sides. I mean, are there particular constraints and reforms that are happening on the revenue raising side, and I think more perhaps importantly on the revenue spending side? That's one question. The related question is, are there innovations in local governance that you think are of some interest and have particularly consequential local governance innovations? Do you think this is a serious constraint? Do you feel, when you try to work in the field, do you feel that there is some level at which you hit some constraint there? So all of the things that Robin said, in a sense, I just want reactions from both of you, because I think you both must have dealt with these issues and must have views and must have insights to offer.
So when the commission came here at that time, we were seized with this issue of resources, how to raise resources for development, and what is the scenario for future. What we found was that we compared our development expenditure with the national average, and we found that we stand at the bottom of the heap. Our per capita development expenditure is the lowest in the country. So we said, what happens if we continue to grow the way we are growing? We found that our rate of resource mobilization is better than the national average for all the states taken together. And our revenue is growing at a hefty, at handsome 20+%. But if you look at our entire budget, our own resources comprise only about 20% of the entire budget. So the budget is funded only 15 to 20% by our own resources. And we are more dependent on the resources from center by way of devolution. So looking at the growth of the per capita development expenditure, we found it is better than the national average at the moment. But in order to go up to the level of the national average, we would take no less than 33 years. That is, we would have to wait until 2040. 5 years back, if you looked at the data, there was a divergence. So, which would have meant that we would never equalize. But now the situation has improved. We would equalize, but in 2040. So when I put this up before the Chief Minister, he said, I cannot accept this. We cannot wait for that long. We should try to go there earlier. So he set a target date of 2015. So we made our projections accordingly, and we did that to the Finance Commission. Now the question is, how do you get this this amount of resources? No amount of effort on our part is going to give us that kind of money by way of taxation, levies and fees. Therefore, there has to be some mechanism for greater devolution of funds. There has to be some mechanism which would allow also to go for more borrowing from the market and from the multilaterals and the institutions. So this is the constraint that we have to look at. And at the same time, this tenfold increase in expenditure over a period of say 9 years has also brought in problems which he has mentioned. Like, how do you absorb this money into and use it for development expenditure? For long period of time, we did not make any recruitment. All departments are deficient in terms of manpower. So we are now into the process of recruiting people so that we have hands available to implement our programs. Equally important, or perhaps more, is the issue of capacity building, because the people that we have, they have to be given those skills and the motivation to implement these schemes. So these are the challenges that we face, and we are working on them, and things have improved because the fact that we have managed to increase the level of expenditure to 12,700, which was unimaginable 4 years back, that shows that we are making some progress in this direction, but a lot more needs to be done.
Sharma.
Actually, if we compare the revenue, the resource, which was available at the time of bifurcation and right now, even the own resources of the state government have at least gone up 5 times. At the time of bifurcation, the total resource which was left with Bihar, that included sales tax, registration, excise, transportation, that was less than 2,000 crore. And now we'll be touching 10,000, more than 10,000 crore next year. So obviously all this has happened with not without reforms. So a lot of reforms have taken place. Like for example, for registration, the registration, I think the amount which used to come to the treasury in those days, it was something like 350 crore for the entire state, Bihar and Jharkhand. And Bihar's share would be about 250 or maybe slightly less than that. Now Bihar alone, is touching 1,000 crore. That happened because the fee was brought down, and the valuation of the property, which used to be shown as at a very low value, that has been standardized. The registration offices, they have improved. So general, the compliance has become much better. Similar with VAT, same thing with excise. Excise also, it was 250 crore in those days, Bihar, Jharkhand together. Now Bihar alone is touching 1,000 crore. So obviously there has been a lot of work that has been done by all the departments which are resource raising department. Similarly for expenditure reforms, we had this FRBM Act which was brought in, and Bihar never exceeded that 3% target of fiscal deficit as a percentage of GSDP. I think right from 2005-06, when the FRBM Act came, 2006-07 we were 3.02%. Just very marginally we were higher than 3% of the target. Otherwise, all along, we have been less than 2%. So Bihar has consistently, adhered to the target set in the FRBM Act. Our revenue deficit, which was there till about 2004-05. Became revenue surplus, by 2005-06, 2006-07, I think we became surplus, and that revenue surplus has been maintained so far. It's a very healthy revenue surplus figure nowadays. The expenditure was a problem, the problem which you alluded to, that money was coming in, it was not being utilized. I won't say that we have completely overcome that, but there has been great improvement on that score. Our level of utilization of centrally sponsored scheme or even EAP, this time when I went to Planning Commission for the discussion, they were very pleasantly surprised that we had used almost 1,000 crore of externally aided project money, and next year we have a target of 1,600 crore. So obviously the level of utilization has gone up. Earlier, there was very little decentralization. In fact, any scheme which was more than 25 lakh, which is a very small amount, had to come to the cabinet. It had to be approved by the cabinet. So a lot of decentralization took place. Now, in fact, the amount for which this scheme doesn't have to come to cabinet is 20 crore. So in fact, many of the departments, their plan outlay will be less than 20 crore. So in fact, for no scheme of theirs, they have to come to the cabinet. So with that kind of decentralization, obviously the level of expenditure has picked up. Most of these schemes are cleared within 6 months of the financial year. Whereas earlier, the schemes would be sanctioned even in February and March. The schemes would be sanctioned. Since the sanctioning of the schemes happens, before the working season starts, so obviously the level of expenditure has improved. In fact, this year we have exceeded about 50% of the target in our plan side has already been exceeded. So it's a remarkable turnaround, and the general level in the department, though of course we have still a lot of distance to cover, but there has been tremendous improvement in the both expenditure and resource management. Was there anything else? Was the second part of the question?
I mean, I guess I had a question about local governance. If you think local governance is a constraint, in what form?
Local governance is something where we have just started, and a lot of capacity needs to be built in. The local governance, a lot of money is flowing, but the kind of monitoring which should be there, that those systems have to be brought in. We are very much on the task. In fact, Development Commissioner has kept a meeting on 19th. That there's a meeting where we'll be discussing these issues of capacity building. But certainly that this is one aspect where we need to a lot of improvement has to come.
Yeah, may I add a little bit this, about the local governance? You see, this the panchayat elections took place in 2006, and all the panchayats have elected officials there. 12th Finance Commission had made specific allocations for the local bodies, and this money has been going. And for some of the money goes for certain specified tasks, but there are some untied funds also which are going to them. Now the problem that we are facing today is that in the panchayat you have the mukhya who is supposed to be doing all this. He has support of one person, and the money at his disposal today is quite huge, and that money is to be used for various kinds of schemes. So they find it difficult to use that money to implement the schemes. They also don't know how to frame a scheme, how to formulate a scheme, how to go about engaging people to do that, and how to keep accounts. Because after all, at the end of the year, they are supposed to submit accounts also. So these issues are being addressed now. We are giving them some manpower to do this work, to help them. Talking about implementation of schemes, one problem that the panchayats are facing today is that they do not have technical support. For example, if they want to make a culvert, then somebody has to prepare a estimate for that, and then a contractor is to be engaged. And when the work is done, then somebody has to see that it is done, the quality is okay, and when a payment is to be made, he has to make measurements and make payment. That kind of support is not available. What we have now is that this kind of work is being done by the Public Works Department or one of the departments, and they have their own structure. They have engineers, they have junior engineers, technicians at them. But their numbers are such that in a district you would have maybe 15 junior engineers and you have 20 blocks. So one junior engineer is looking at maybe 1 plus or 2 blocks. Now each block has 20 panchayats. So that is the kind of a thing. Now that one person cannot provide support to all of them. So we are thinking how do we place technical expertise at the disposal of these panchayats. So these are the issues that we are going to discuss. We have to come up with some innovative methods to use, say, the private sector, how to establish linkages with them so that they are empowered to do this. And some of the things, for example, for accounting, for helping in correspondence, reporting, etc., manpower is being recruited and being provided to them.
Thank you.
Good time?
Yeah. We've definitely time for all of you to say, the rest of the people to say something.
I wanted to add a couple of points about what could be done immediately. These aren't Roberto's long-term history tested, proven points of what's going to definitely transform growth. But I think there are some things which could happen straight away, which are within the government's control, which we might be thought about. One of them, I should say, my technical designation is as a diplomat, and my staff hate it when I come up on these sorts of things because I'm not very diplomatic. I tend to be too honest. So I hope you take it in that spirit, that it's meant with a supportive spirit behind it. One of the things that could be done straight away is focusing on nutrition of the under-2s. And the thing that people don't talk about enough is that if there's not adequate nutrition in the first year of life, there's a very high probability of cognitive impairment. And an impaired brain is a problem for decades and decades and decades. And if you're thinking about the future orientation, the nutrition of the under-2s is many, many, many times more important than the nutrition of 5 or 6-year-olds. And at the moment, we're putting across India, but across the world, we're putting too much emphasis on the nutrition of older children and not enough emphasis on the nutrition of under-2s. And with a future orientation in mind, this is really vital. And we know that the combination of Anganwadi centers who are focusing on older children by and large, and health not looking at the nutrition of under-2s enough, it just isn't being done. So that's one thing that could be cracked by bringing together the Anganwadi centers working with the health departments to really focus on this task like a laser to make sure that that is cracked, because that could make a difference for decades to come. So that's one thing that could be done straight away. A second thing that could be done, Roberto talked about the importance of leadership. Leadership's important not only at the level of the chief minister and the chief secretary, we're very blessed to have with us today, but at the level of people who are implementing programs. And one problem that bureaucracies around the world face, it's not just Bihar, it's everywhere in the world, there's a problem of officials changing jobs too quickly. And this is one thing which we've seen governments can shape, that if there's determination to keep strong leadership in charge of particular programs for longer periods of time, we've seen over and over again more gets done. And the reason for that is because the officials are not on the steep end of the learning curve the whole time. They develop the relationships, they develop the knowledge, they can implement for longer. And we know that makes a big difference. So that's something, again, which can be changed quite quickly. The third thing that could be changed early on is when rolling out big state programs, roll them out in a phased way. Don't hit the entire state at once, but roll them out in a phased way so that the studies can be done in a way to see what is the difference between the impact of places where the program is done and where it's not done. So those are three things which can be done sort of straight away, which within the control of the government. I want to just mention quickly two long-term things to meet your 5. One long-term thing is focus on creating the conditions for urbanization. Bihar is the least urbanized state in the country. Unless we get people off the crowded agricultural areas, that's just not going to be a transformation. And I know the government of Bihar is working on this hard, but it's two things. It's infrastructure and it is governance of the urban areas. Those are critical things which need to be addressed in the longer term. And my last long-term thing is this point about leveraging the global economy. There are a number of things that could be done there that more could be done. A much more aggressive approach to the incredibly dynamic Bihari diaspora around the world, but also working on things like regional trade. South Asia is the least economically integrated region in the world, And there's some terrific World Bank studies showing that economies at the periphery of a country that have external boundaries benefit the most from external trade. And Bihar, if there were more active trade between Bihar and Nepal and other neighbors in the region, we just know there are real benefits to be had there. And I realize that's something within the grasp of Delhi rather than Bihar, but Bihar could say, look, we are really interested in regional trade. So I'm going to stop at those 5.
Perfect. Unfortunately, as things getting more and more interesting, I'm getting signals that we have to end the session and go to the next one. So I will say thank you to all of you for a fascinating session, and Iqbal will take over. Thank you very much.